grasping the thin, almost translucent veil between that of fact and fiction, revealing mysteries of the past, folklore passed down from father to son, unsolved murders, and things that go bump in the night. You've entered Deceptive Reality.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Deceptive Reality Podcast. My name is Nick, and with me, as always, is the disquisitive Bert. Do you know that one?
Disquisitive?
This one fits you better than any I've used, I think.
Man, I have no clue what this one means at all.
Okay. It is fond of discussion and investigation.
That is me. Listen, and this one is my segment this week, Nick. This one is all me. And before you naysayers say, this podcast is screwed up, he doesn't have the right shirt on, that would be incorrect. This is actually a superior shirt. For those of you that can see it, those of you that's listening, I'm sorry. But we got a UFO, we got Bigfoot, and we got the Loch Ness Monster. Ooh.
Now, when we were getting started, that's exactly what I said. I said, something's wrong. I can't put my finger on it. Your shirt is plain, sir. I was mistaken.
That is incorrect, Nick. Listen, hey, I can't help it. Sometimes things are just not correct. I got to point it out when it's not correct, Nick.
Yeah, that's right. What you may not know about this podcast, if you're listening, is that we have $100,000 budget on this podcast, but it all goes to building a new closet on Bert's house to house all these shirts. He's got millions of them.
This is true. Listen, I need a closet the size of a house to fit all these.
That's right. A second house, a McMansion house right next to yours.
And on the side, I've actually got like 6 of the shirts. So when I get done, I literally take the shirt off and I put it over there like a what is that called? Like football players do, or baseball players
like
when they throw a ball.
Oh. Just dispose of them every time.
Exactly. I'm like, burn this one. This one's done.
Yeah. There's a big furnace right to the side of you. Just whoosh.
Exactly. I also purchased, which I might incorporate eventually. I got a green screen for the back of my chair.
Oh.
So eventually, one day, you guys might see like a little UFO coming in behind me or something.
Right. It occurs to me now that we should have perhaps got green screens instead of what we have going on here now.
What are you talking about, Nick? That's real. We're both at the same location.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Green screens are better than reality.
Well, that is true, because you can do some pretty awesome stuff with green screens.
Oh, heck yeah. Heck yeah.
I could have had a Santa countdown if I used my green screen. Technically, I could just take a photo of the background, put my green screen on, and you suckers would never know.
Yeah. And I think, I don't remember if we discussed this on the air or off, but Christmas is your holiday. Christmas is what Halloween is to me.
Yes. Christmas is Old Saint Nick. This year, I hope I am back on the good list.
Oh,
last few years.
Think so.
Last few years, not so much. Listen, I've forgotten so much coal and no place to put it.
That's kind of valuable nowadays. You can sell that and buy better presents.
I never thought of that, Nick. That's valid.
Yeah.
That's true.
He's helping you.
Speaking of which, listen, we got the Christmas episode right around the corner, folks. You're not going to want to miss that one. Nick and I, we're already in preparations for it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But it is not Christmas time today, Nick. This is my story this week. Now, listen, folks, I don't want to hear no belly aching in the comments anywhere. This is a long one.
I think it's like that.
Maybe a few does not for sure confirmed.
Are you just talking like about your family who don't
yes.
like waiting for things?
They do not like waiting. Listen, this one I'm like 95% sure this will be a 2-parter. Here's why I say that. I cut the narration down to 19 minutes and 22 seconds, but there's 8 total segments. and I've got how many pages of notes? 8 pages of notes. So each page
Ooh.
has info.
I'm prepped for a Circleville or Bob Lazar complexity that I'm going to
Yeah.
have to put on my little notepad to keep up.
I told Nick, I said, listen, I've tried to make this as easy to understand as I can. Here's what's going to make this one so fascinating. And I think Nick's definitely going to know the story. I think some of you guys will know the story also. I've been fascinated
I wish you
with the
didn't
story.
say that.
Yeah, you're going to know this story. I'm like 95% sure.
See, when you say that, I feel a lot of pressure. And then if I don't know the story, I'll feel like the dum-dum.
You're not going to know this story as deep as I know this story.
Okay. I just hope I know it at all.
I've done some really deep digging here because here's where people's going to get shocked. It is very, in my opinion, anti-biblical.
Oh, really?
Which is, as anyone knows, I'm a man of the cloth, but this one I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm super confused now. I can't even imagine what it could be.
Well, are you ready for the intro? The intro is going to tell us exactly what it is.
I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll make myself ready.
Let's stop talking about it. Let's be about it. Let's go.
Yes, sir.
Picture a charming house in suburban London, where ivy curls around the front door and roses bloom in the garden. Here, we find a 3-year-old cheerful, playful child whose laughter fills every room of the home. It's a picture of a peaceful childhood, innocence, and joy. But then, one ordinary day turns extraordinary. Young Dorothy is running through the house, her footsteps light, her giggles trailing behind her like a cheerful echo. She reaches the top of the staircase. Perhaps she misjudges a step. Perhaps her tiny feet can't keep up with her excitement. Whatever the reason, she tumbles, falling down the staircase, her small body landing in a heap at the bottom. Time seems to stand still. The house, once filled with the music of her laughter, falls eerily silent. Her parents rush to her side, their faces pale, their hearts gripped by an unspeakable dread. Medical professionals arrive on the scene and their verdict is chilling. Dorothy has passed away. Just as loss began to flood the room, Dorothy stirs. Her eyes flicker open and she takes a shaky breath. She comes back to life, but forever changed. The doctors are baffled. They had just declared her gone, if only for a few heart-stopping moments. What they don't yet realize is that these brief moments were a threshold, a doorway to something that defies understanding. When she wakes up, something within her has forever shifted. No longer the Dorothy her family once knew, she begins pleading to be brought home. For her bewildered parents, this statement makes no sense. They are already home. Now begins the story of Dorothy Eady.
That was, man, I got caught up in that narration. I gotta tell you.
That's the goal, Nick. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I don't know yet if I know this one.
I bet you do, but you probably don't know the name. So for anyone that doesn't know, it's a story of Dorothy Eady. Of course, everyone knows this except for Nick right now because you guys have read the YouTube title. But the
that's
story
not
of
fair.
Dorothy, I know, right? They kind of know what's all. Listen, they probably Google search this before they come on, Nick. Like, what the heck is this story? So, for anyone that doesn't know this, and I didn't give away what the story's about. I just wanted to build the parallel so you understand the gravity. And I was telling Nick, I don't think I said it here, but this story is so deep and so profound, and it's always intrigued me because of the dynamic of this story. Since Nick doesn't know what is so special about Dorothy Eady, it's going to start explaining that in the second segment. But there's a few things that I want to highlight from the first segment that doesn't give anything away.
Okay.
The first one, Dorothy Eady's upstairs, 3 years old, falls down a stairway. Completely normal child. Never had anything that made her. This is going to sound wrong. I don't mean to, but nothing made her special. She was just a normal, everyday 3-year-old child. Now, as someone who has a 2-year-old going on 3, it kind of makes you think sometimes, kind of like, well, what is this child going to be like? Right.
Mm.
And what happens next kind of, if anything, makes me go, the other thing that I want to note is there was a miraculous recovery. Bam. Instant, right? The doctors come now by miraculous recovery. We're still talking 10s of 20s of minutes, right? Doctors get there, and you got this time frame is 1930s, I think.
Oh, that was my next question.
Yeah, I think it's 1930s.
Yeah, back then they were still doing the mirror in front of the nose thing to check if people were alive or dead, weren't they?
Yeah, kind of. Now, from what I understand, is they truly did diagnose her. Listen, she passed away. Mom was frantic. Very shortly after, she starts regaining consciousness. Now, this was a big stairway too. Big stairway. And what happens next is kind of what makes this story so interesting. And at the end of it, I'm sure you all heard, she's there and she says, I want to go back home.
Yeah, I think you sort of leaked a little bit of what this is about. Like, she's completely different than who she was.
Maybe.
And I'll tell you one thing, though, not really related to the supernatural part. I joke about not liking kids a lot, but when that story was building up to the stairway, like my heart was jumping in my chest. I was like, don't go there, baby. Don't go there.
Oh, man. But that's the thing. Like, if the narration just tells the narration, I feel like you go, okay, cool. But when you hear it, it invokes a whole different response.
Yeah, that disturbed me. I don't want no kids near staircases ever, or running with scissors or any of that business.
Correct. That's a very unsafe thing with kids, because kids, listen, they do crazy things from time to time, but occasionally accidents happen too.
Yeah, I mean, they're not any more coordinated than adults are. The good thing about kids, though, is their bodies are better able to handle that kind of thing sometimes. So,
oh yeah, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, that's where that bouncing babies come from. They're all rubber.
Yeah, but think about a stairway back then.
All hardwood.
All hardwood. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you ready to figure out what makes her so special, Nick?
I am, but I want to make, like we did with this, the other one, I'm going to make a prediction and then be wrong about it later.
Okay.
Because I find this fun. So from the information I've got, she died, and the girl that woke up was another girl in her body. That's my prediction right now. Whole other personality, whole other spirit inside this little girl's body.
Maybe it is, Nick. Maybe it is.
This is Dorothy number 2.
After her curious waking, Dorothy becomes a clearly different child. Her parents notice it first in her drawings. Gone are the usual childish scribbles of animals and stick figures. Now she sketches pyramids and sphinxes, complete with intricate hieroglyphics. Mind you, she's just 4 years old. School proves to be an unusual challenge. Not because Dorothy finds it difficult, but rather because she disputes the lessons on ancient Egypt. They've got it all wrong, she insists, speaking with the conviction of someone who has been there. Her teachers are puzzled, and her classmates look at her in disapproval. But Dorothy remains steadfast in her belief. As she grows older, her strong feelings about Egypt start causing trouble at school, and even at church. In Sunday school, Dorothy starts asking questions that make her teacher uncomfortable. She talks about how the old gods of Egypt are just as real as the Christian God. Her teacher doesn't like this and asks her parents not to bring her to class anymore. Dorothy also runs into problems at her regular school. She's asked to leave her all-girls school in Dulwich because she won't sing a song that speaks badly about Egyptians. She can't bring herself to sing words that curse the land and people she feels so connected to. There's more. Dorothy starts going to a Roman Catholic church, not because she's Catholic, but because something about the Mass feels familiar to her, like the old religion she talks about. But even this comes to an end. A priest talks to her and her parents and asks a lot of questions. After that, she's not allowed to attend Mass there anymore. It doesn't take long before other peculiarities manifest. She insists on being called by another name, Omm Sety, and wakes from her sleep talking of a place along the Nile where she claims to have lived. She describes the Temple of Seti I and Abydos in unnervingly vivid detail. Her parents are at a loss and seek professional advice. They consult psychologists, spiritual counselors, and even entertain the idea of an exorcism. Every expert they consult is baffled. Aside from her unusual fixations, Dorothy is a completely normal child. And then there are the dreams. Dorothy recounts vivid, haunting dreams where she converses with pharaohs and walks through ancient temples. She wakes up singing hymns and chanting verses that haven't been heard for millennia. As Dorothy gets older, her love for everything about Egypt grows bigger. She's not just drawing pictures anymore. Now, she's reading every book about Egypt she can find, even the hard ones that most kids her age wouldn't understand. Her parents don't get it, but they see she's really into it. By the time she's 12, Dorothy does something amazing. She learns how to read the picture words from ancient Egypt called hieroglyphics, and she's good at it. So good that even her teachers start to think she's not just some odd kid, but maybe a sort of genius in her own way. As Dorothy grows older, the line between her current life and her past life blurs. She describes events and locations with such accuracy that it catches the attention of academics and skeptics. But even they can't explain how a young girl from suburban London could know such intricacies of a world long gone.
Oh, this is blowing my mind already. This is fascinating.
Do you know this story?
I don't know this story. I've never heard a peep about it.
Oh, man, Nick, this is the most exciting thing I've heard.
This is one of the most exciting stories I've ever heard. I can't believe I've not heard this before.
I can't believe it either.
This is ridiculous.
So you were you was 97.9% right. You just didn't fixate on one thing. This is a story of reincarnation.
Okay.
But it's probably the best story of reincarnation I know.
Wait, how do we know it's reincarnation?
You're definitely going to find out by the end of this thing. I can't give it away now because I'd be giving. Let's put it this way. And the last segment kind of dove into some of it. And I'm going to back up a little bit to make it a little bit easier because there's some things I didn't want to cover until we got to this point, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things in the first two segments that it kind of divulged. One thing is as she grew older, she didn't want to be known as Dorothy Eady. Now, as a kid, they're like, tough luck, kid. That's your name. And she goes, my name is Omm Sety, Ommsety, Omm Sety.
Okay.
So that's how she wants to be referred to.
Right. And
now
that I'll let you continue.
I go ahead because you're going to lose your thought. You're going to lose your thought. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, does it explain later on how we know that Dorothy is not just gone and that was separate and this is a new spirit into the body? Like, do we know how do we know it's reincarnation and not a swapping of souls?
It doesn't really go into that in this segment, but Dorothy still remembers portions of her life as a child.
Yes.
They don't go into that a whole lot in the research, but the parents said that they thought Dorothy was there, but she inhibited this new experience. No different than almost like people, there's stories where you get a blood transfusion and all of a sudden like your taste of things change.
Yeah.
And there's cases where people would be in accidents and then they come out of the accidents and they're able to speak a completely different language they never knew before.
Right. Which is very
This
wild,
is
and I think they've proved that before that happens.
correct. Because they have not only the capability of speaking other language, but with the same accent and the same the way they, what's that called? Where they
Like the
basically,
dialect or
the dialect. Yes, that's what I was looking for,
okay.
which is
Yeah.
crazy, right? You can fake a lot of things. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot fake a dialect. You just can't. Not
No.
efficiently.
Yeah, that's difficult to learn unless you're immersed in it completely.
Correct. Now, this, for the record, is very anti biblical because we do not believe in reincarnation.
Is there anything that specifically says that can't be a thing?
Yes. Biblically, yes.
Okay.
Biblically
Mm,
speaking, the way it's supposed, there's two trains of thought biblically. The first one is you die
right.
and you're in the ground until, well, biblically, depending on if you're Christian, but Jews
Yeah.
believe something very different. But if you're Orthodox Jew, you're still the Torah or Old Testament. Christians, most of us are all the same. But there's two settings. You're either in the ground, Jesus comes, and then everyone goes to heaven together. Or theory two is
Mm,
you die, you go to heaven, and then you live in heaven. That's just the so reincarnation. There's nowhere in any of the Torah, Old Testament, New Testament,
mm.
none of it is it you die and then you get to come back.
Which of those two trains are you on?
Um, I don't know.
The first one sounds scary as heck to me.
The way that I lean more towards that version. I don't really know. And the Bible isn't, again, the Bible speaks a lot metaphorically towards things, but the way
Mm.
it's explained is it's almost like you're asleep. And when Jesus, it's like when we wake up from our sleep, we don't know if we was asleep for 6 minutes or 6 hours most of the time.
I'm usually sleep 6 minutes, but
See, there you go. See, but
yeah,
that's the way we look at it.
right.
We don't know how long we're truly asleep for, and who's to know? Maybe we're in like a dream phase at that point. We don't biblically. There's no answers for that, and I don't think we're supposed to know biblically that answer. But this is definitely 100% not in our
I,
Bible.
I'm trying to think of all the biblical stories I know if there's anything similar. What about
Mhm.
now? This wouldn't be so. Well, I don't know if you classify this as a reincarnation. What about the story of Lazarus?
Lazarus was
That's sort
brought
of
back
coming
from the
back, isn't it?
dead into his own body.
Okay, but he
And
was dead,
technically,
and then he came
yes,
back.
technically, biblically speaking, when they went to Lazarus, it was funny because the story, not to go all biblical on y'all, but it is a fascinating story if you take the
Yeah.
biblical part of it. Just look at it as a history lesson here. Jesus is out. He finds out that Lazarus is dead. He's told to come back to where Lazarus is. They come, they're crying. They're like, you got to come. And he's like, people, I'm teaching here. I'm on my way. But because it takes him so long, Lazarus dies by the time he gets there.
Oh,
Now, it's said that he was starting to reek. So he's starting to smell. That means he'd been dead for a minute.
it took him a long time to get there. He was busy.
I mean, listen, he's passing the good word along on his way
Mhm.
there.
True,
But
true.
he gets there and they kind of are mad at him. They're like, you could have stopped this from happening. And he basically is like, he's only asleep. And they're like, he basically reeks. He smells in there. He's not asleep. Jesus says, Lazarus, rise from the dead, or rise. I don't even think he said from the dead, but rise. And Lazarus walks out like, what up, peeps? Crazy story. But again, it goes back to my theory, and the Bible's not going to be like, hey, he was in heaven for however long, and it
Right.
doesn't tell you how long the time frame is, but they do refer to there was like a stench. So,
Did he
and he was wrapped.
unstench?
He still had like his burial cloths on.
Right, but when he came back, was he unstinkified, or
They don't
I
say.
guess we don't know.
Mm-mm.
That'd be
I
unfortunate.
definitely was not there. I know I'm old. I'm not that old.
Yeah, I guess they wouldn't. They're not interested in that detail. Although I'd write that down.
Yeah, I think
I'd be like, Lazarus came back, still stank.
You know what? I guess the only thing that doesn't make sense is they would have put anointing oils, or not anointing oils, but like oils on them. Like,
right. And they wrapped him up.
Yeah, he still had the garments on him. He still had the burial cloths on him when he came out. Could you imagine?
Don't they wrap you completely, like legs together, arms together?
I think that it was very different. They're not mummies. They was just wrapped very.
Right.
My guess is not as tough. Like
I mean, that's
they took
minutia anyway.
Yeah,
like that.
Because at the end of the day,
super important.
If he raised someone from the dead, I highly doubt he's going to have a problem with the burial cloth situation.
Yeah, that's right. And he can unstinkify someone. I made up this word, but I'm sticking with it.
Listen, hey,
he could unstinkify someone.
That's what Bert does. I stinkify things. From time to time.
I'm stealing your script here. There is another thing I wanted to ask too.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sticking on the biblical track.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me from my readings and my interpretations, because the girl mentioned that the gods of Egypt were just as real as the Christian God kind of thing.
Yep.
Now, my reading and interpretation of the Bible, and I'm not a super Bible guy, I just like stories, so you can correct me. I don't think it ever said that there weren't additional gods. It was that you can't have any before me. So I don't think it said that there were none. They just weren't as powerful as the main one. Is that a bad interpretation or?
Nope. Biblically speaking, there was many gods.
Right. Because I remember specifically Baal he challenged.
Baal, yeah, the calf, the golden calf, Baal. There was a lot of them. Baal was probably, if you look at Old Testament, Exodus, that was a big one. But a lot of people was praising all these other gods. And I guess technically, if you think about it, again, and this is why there's two camps as far as what happens when you die. There is technically when Jesus was on the cross and there was the two sinners on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
When the one looked over and said, "I'm not worthy, but can you forgive me?" He forgave the guy and he said, "Surely we will see each other in heaven."
Right.
So technically the question, or surely today or something, there was, I don't know the exact phrasing and I don't want to paraphrase because it's very religious, but the theory was he would have saw Jesus in heaven as they died, which was shortly after. So there's two camps. As far as the gods things, I mean, there was a lot of different gods. The Baal was a huge one, but I think what Dorothy was saying is just as important as the Christian God is these gods.
Right.
And that goes right back to a completely different biblical thought process because, again, if you're looking at it from a biblical standpoint, and I'm going to tick a lot of Christians off. I'm really sorry. There is another book. There is an entirely another book that was not allowed in the Bible. And
there were many, actually.
Yeah, but there was like one really big one.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm thinking it could be the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
No. Nope. Oh. This one has to do with other gods.
Oh, okay. No, I don't know this one.
It is the book of I just had it and I just lost it. It just went in and it left just that quickly. Doesn't matter anyway. Basically what it talks about, and it gives kind of the impression of UFO a little bit. Doesn't come out and say UFO. And the way that it's interpreted is Nephilim, which I've referred to also because it's not anti-biblical. The Nephilim was in the Bible. But the fallen angels fell And one of the theories is that the fallen angels had fallen to earth, and then they, as earth was being progressed, they were one of the ones that was there that was mating with normal women. And this was all
Right.
the Book of Enoch. Sorry.
I have heard of
Had to
that.
think.
I apologize
Couldn't
too.
think of it. It came and left, and then it just came. Look at that. It just came back around. It's like, hello.
Now, the Book of Enoch, if I'm not mistaken, had a lot of really occultish stuff and supernatural stuff in it. Like, it was one of the more supernatural books, and probably why it wasn't canonized.
Yeah, that's kind of why I said what I said at the beginning of this. Is not very biblical. Here's my thing, folks. Listen, no one chastised me on this. I think to fully understand and put your faith in something, you need to look at everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is I don't want a man to tell me, because we don't have burning bushes and stuff going on now. I don't want a man to tell me what I should interpret something as. So I want to read everything and go, because just because the Book of Enoch, it follows a lot of stuff from the Old Testament. I'm just saying, not saying that it shouldn't be in there. But again, who's to say that the Catholic Church didn't want things left out because it benefited the Catholic Church? Who knows? But again, it doesn't make or break me whether I know something else.
Right. And I'm going to support you on this and say that acknowledging this doesn't degrade you as a Christian, because I think everyone must agree that the Council of Nicaea was a thing. All Christians acknowledge this, do they not?
They do.
And the Council of Nicaea set across what was in the Bible and what was not. That's still a historical fact. So acknowledging these other books exist is just reality. And denying that they exist is bad defense of your faith.
A lot of people that are real heavy biblical people go, well, you're looking at stuff you shouldn't be looking at. I see the world from a slightly different perspective. Just because I look at something doesn't mean that I follow down that path per se.
Right.
But I want to know what's there. So I myself can say, because here's the thing, right? Let's say someone comes to me, and I've studied apologetics before. What if someone comes to me and goes, I believe X, Y, and Z. And I go, okay, I don't believe that. And they go, well, what do you say about this? And then they hand it to me and I go, I don't know anything about it. At least now I can argue my points from my side. I'd prefer to know both sides, no differently than in my day-to-day occupation. I work in the world of finance. I know my competition better than I know my own product.
Right.
But that's for a reason. No one's going to catch me off guard with anything.
No, and I think that's perfectly natural and smart. And I don't think there's anything that says not to read these things. Look, the apple's already been eaten. We're creatures of knowledge now. So
it's one thing to know differently than, just because I know Satanism or, the book of Satanism is there doesn't mean that I'm going to go and start practicing whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
It's
and I mean, that's not even concept. They don't even believe in Satan really.
No,
so.
Of course not. They're just anti-establishment is the best way I can put it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it seems like we've gone off on a tangent, but we really haven't, because this is all related to the original point.
Correct. Now, if we look at, you're fine.
No, go ahead.
If we look at Dorothy Eady, the biggest things that I think in the last two segments, above and beyond what we just talked about, is there's a huge change in everything about her life. The first one is, this is why I'm going back to reincarnation. She's a typical kid, and it said that in the narration. It said it in the research. She was drawing stick figures, crude animals. My daughter does that now. And it's funny because I look at stuff and I go, oh, what's that? And she goes, that's you. I go, looks just like me. Whoa.
All of a sudden, Bert runs up the stairs to his daughter. What's your Egyptian name? What's your Egyptian name?
But that's the thing. Like Dorothy goes from drawing those things to drawing pyramid, sphinxes, hieroglyphics, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
She progresses, and I'm looking over at my notes for anyone that's like, what's he looking at over there? There's so many notes and we're covering so much stuff, and I forget where things are in segments. So I kind of split it up here a little bit, make it easier for me. These segments are longer too, just for the record. Some of these are a little longer. There's one really short segment, but most of them's a little longer, 2 to 3 minutes each. A big thing that I found interesting is obviously when she's going to school and she's doing her stuff and she's doing her religious education, she gets very angry when it's anything that berates. And again, if you're getting brought up in a Christian household, the Egyptians were not necessarily the friendliest of folks in the Old Testament. So I can see where she'd be like, why are they speaking? If this is a true story, and we're not saying it is, folks, but if she believes it's true that she is this Omm Sety now, then I can see why she would be mad. Prime example, if you think about the story of Moses going in and talking to the Pharaoh, in which I don't know if you're looking at anything Egyptian right now, Nick. Are you looking at any history or any news coming out from Egyptian pyramids and stuff?
No, not at the moment, not recent.
So there was a recent news article, not to go too far off on a tangent, but I found it very interesting. The biggest problem they have with the story of Moses is they've never found a timeline based on the things that's biblically spoke of to where they go, that makes sense. So they always said, this is clearly made up. They found proof of Moses's timeline in Egyptian history within the last 3 to 4 months. The Pharaoh that they were speaking of, they found a Pharaoh that sat around that time frame.
There is one other thing they found a couple years back that is somewhat problematic, though. And that is that while there likely were slaves in Egypt, slaves were not working on the pyramids. Did you hear that one?
I don't know that I have, Nick. I'm trying to think.
Yeah. Do you know who Zahi Hawass is?
Oh, yeah. I dislike him a lot.
A lot of people do, but he's the head of Egyptology for Egypt.
Of course he is. Can I just say before you're going to say whatever you're going to say, because I'm sure you're going to say something, I'm going to explain why I dislike this man.
Okay.
For anyone that does not know, this guy has basically wrote the entire history of the Egyptian. Like if there was a quote unquote expert, it's him. The problem is, like Graham Hancock is a prime example. His dad before him and his grandfather all studied Egyptian history, and they found a lot of things that didn't quite make sense in the timeline. When they questioned him, that man shut him down. And every single time they've tried to bring him into a discussion, he refuses and he walks away and he goes, I'm not having this discussion. I'm the expert. Whenever someone says that, you don't know what you're talking about and you're trying to save your lineage and your name. But you can go ahead now. I've gotten off my soapbox.
He is very abrasive. Yes. But I don't think that necessarily diminishes his legitimate finds. Because what they found is that when people who were working on the pyramids perished, they stopped and built them small tombs next to the pharaoh's tombs, and they've uncovered them. So they are saying that it's very unlikely, along with the writing inside those tombs, that they would have done that for a expendable workforce. They had highly skilled laborers working.
Well, you do know the hieroglyphics that's there. They confirmed that it's chipped away from the time frame of the Egyptians. Nowhere does it talk about the Egyptians building that stuff. Nowhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also,
I guess
the
they don't
man you're
have to
talking
sign
about,
it.
the man that you're talking about has been found to be a fraud numerous times.
I did not know that. I'll have to look into that more. But I think that particular finding, I don't think you could dispute because anyone can verify it. But other ones could very well be.
Well, like here's a prime example. Like when we talk about the pyramids eroding away, what caused the erosion?
Wind and sand, I'd
That is
assume.
what he states because he's the
Right.
expert. It's very well known by anyone besides him that is due to water, not from sand and wind.
I mean, that's not too far out there because like a lot of that area was prime farmland at one time. It wasn't always a desert.
Correct. We're going to cover some of that today.
Oh, okay.
Also,
fun fact before we move on. Do you know that Cleopatra is the time to Cleopatra existed is closer to today than it was to the building of the pyramids?
Well, that's very interesting. I did not know that.
Yep. That's how much time has gone by, that she lived closer to today than she did to win the pyramids. By the time she was alive, those pyramids were like a bit of a mystery to them too.
Isn't that super crazy?
Yeah.
Yet
like time is huge.
But we pretend like we understand what's going on and we have no clue. It'd be like if we vanished right now and someone came here 4,000, 5,000 years later. They looked at everything and said, I understand exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck.
I got to go off on one more tangent and then I'll stop. I promise. It just goes to prove this point. Do you know Homer's The Iliad? The story of the war in Troy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
For almost all our history until I think it was the 40s or 50s, they thought that was completely made up. They didn't even know Troy was a real place.
Right. Yeah.
And a guy who really liked the story searched for it using clues in the story and found Troy, something that we thought was a complete myth, complete fabrication.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it, because again,
it's mental.
We're trying to understand the past as though it's happening now.
Right. In the context of what we know now.
Correct. It's no different than like, again, when someone reads their Bible and they read it at face value and then they tell me what's going on. And I go, you do understand the context of that, right? And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, this isn't 2023, right? Very different. Like, and tick some Christians off today. I'm sorry. When y'all talk about Corinthians and y'all explain to me what's going on, first do your homework and tell me what was going on in the church of Corinth before you tell me I should incorporate things from the book of Corinthians, please. But that's the problem. We want to read what's there in context. It's no different than getting an owner's manual to a Jeep and trying to equivalent it to a Mazda. You can't do it. Similar parts, but completely different thought process.
Can anyone
I still
know can anyone be sure that they're interpreting it properly?
No, not 100%. It's impossible. That's the thing.
That is the thing.
But the problem is, and again, it goes back to, if you look at just the Bible, the answer is always no. But if you go back to the history of the church of Corinth, you understand what's going on in the church of Corinth. The Bible doesn't go into it because it's irrelevant. The Bible's just saying, don't do this, 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 and this. Church of Corinth.
Right.
This was a letter to the church of Corinth. It's not to Bert and Nick of 2024. Now, it doesn't mean that the lesson can't be adjusted and looked at and go, you know what, I can understand this incorporation no differently than if you read the Old Testament, it says don't eat pork.
Well, I broke that twice today.
See, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But the New Testament, pork is maybe not the best thing to eat, but it's not, you're not going to go to hell for it. So there's that.
Whew.
I know. Whew. Now, to go back to Dorothy Eady.
Yes.
Because I still got a ton of note here. I'm gonna rush through this part a little bit.
We always get so philosophical when it comes to like biblical stuff.
We do, but it fits with this one. So we've not went off on tangents. And it all works. This is why I knew this was going to be probably a two-part.
Heck yeah.
Because there's so many interesting things to this. We haven't even got to the crazy stuff.
We haven't really.
We've only scratched the surface.
This is like two segments in.
2 segments in. So Dorothy Eady wanted to start going to Catholic Mass, the Roman Catholic Mass.
Right.
Not because she believed in Christianity, but if you go back and you look at Egyptians and how they used to do everything, correlation there. The problem was her identity of being Omm Sety and her Egyptian beliefs again caused her to go, I don't like that. Here's what I think. And think about it. She's at this point 10, 12 years old, having deep conversations with priests to the point to where they're like, she can't come back. Like, think about this. This is a grown man going, she's too much. Like, we can't deal with this. I didn't emphasize that in the narration, but that's legit what happened. The school came and was like, she's not singing these songs and she's a little cuckoo. And then you got a Roman Catholic priest come to the household and go, your daughter can't come back. She's too much.
She's too Egypty for us.
The other interesting thing is now she's Omm Sety in her mind, and she claims to have lived along the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, which is a very interesting correlation, she's starting to have vivid dreams. And you're gonna know a name that's going to be coming up very soon, Nick.
Okay.
If you know anything about Egyptian stuff, that is.
I know a fair amount about Egyptians.
So she has these vivid dreams, but they're very detailed in some regards. So things going back to ancient temples. The crazy thing is she starts singing old Egyptian hymns.
Oh, man, I wish we had some recording of that.
Oh, me too.
I don't even know what that would sound like.
Which, by the way, I know Nick had a weird look on his face, and I guarantee all of you did, and I did it purposely. At the beginning of this thing, I had an Egyptian sound that started the entire podcast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I know all of you little boogers was like, he screwed that one up. Why is he doing Egyptian music? That makes no sense.
As soon as I heard that, I didn't know where we were going. That's why I was like, all right, I got no ideas.
That's kind of weird, but okay. The other interesting thing is at 12 years old, Dorothy learned to read hieroglyphics. So she wasn't just doodling symbols. She started reading them at 12 years old.
That's wild. Was this pre? Thank goodness I wrote that down. Was that pre Rosetta Stone? 1930s? When was that?
I don't know. I don't know when Rosetta Stone came out.
I'll have to look that up after.
The other interesting thing is not only was she reading hieroglyphics, but at an elevated level above her teachers are even able to comprehend it.
Wow.
She also started reading books about basically anything that she could get her hands on. She was just ingesting it. The other interesting thing, and this is the last thing that I wanted to draw attention to, she started providing detailed information about ancient Egyptian life. And there was a lot of things that when skeptics was trying to shoot her down, they couldn't do it. And it added a lot of credibility to her actual claim. So people was coming in going, okay, you know everything about Egyptians? What about this? And she goes, oh yeah, that's cool. But look at this. And they're like, I'll be right back. Yeah, basically. So
I
it
got to
definitely.
look it up in a library because this is the 30s and I can't
I gotta
Google
go to
it.
Rosetta Stone. But it's very interesting. The next segment we're going to cover really adds what I call a different dynamic and is based on a trip that I think is going to change the entire landscape. We're going back in time slightly. She's still young, but she's not quite 12 years old at this point. Are you ready to hear what's next?
Yeah, I hope it's not the same trip she took earlier.
Very different trip.
Wah, wah.
Wah, wah.
I'm ready.
One day, Dorothy's parents decide to take her on a trip to the British Museum. They hope it might give their curious daughter a chance to see and learn about Egypt, thinking it might satisfy her endless fascination. Little did they know this trip would only fan the flames of her passion. As they walk through the grand rooms of the museum, Dorothy's excitement is palpable. Her eyes dart from one exhibit to the next, drinking in the rich tapestry of Egyptian history. But then, something extraordinary happens. They enter the New Kingdom Temple exhibits room, and Dorothy is drawn to a particular photograph. It's an image of the Temple of Sety I. "There, that's my home," she exclaims, her voice filled with emotion. But her face soon turns to confusion. Where are the trees? Where are the gardens? She wonders out loud. To her parents' astonishment, she seems to recognize the place as if she had lived there. Overwhelmed with emotion, Dorothy dashes around the room, showing a connection so deep it's almost unsettling. She refers to the ancient statues as her people and even goes so far as to kneel and kiss their feet. The intensity of her reaction draws the attention of other museum goers. On her many subsequent visits, she draws the interest of someone special, Wallis Budge, a prominent figure at the museum. Instead of dismissing her as just another enthusiastic child, he sees something more in her. He's impressed by how much she knows and feels about Egypt. Recognizing her potential, he becomes a mentor of sorts, encouraging her to dive deeper into her studies, particularly in the art of reading hieroglyphs.
That's some detailed knowledge there.
So I think this is what really impressed me about this section. First, as a parent with kids, if I know my kids are into something, sometimes I'll take them to something so they'll shut up about it.
Right. I think that's natural.
It's almost like, let's let them get their fix, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. In this case, the parents are like, oh, we can take her to the museum. There's a section on Egyptian history, and we'll be able to it'll make it go away to a degree.
Right.
She gets there. I can only assume she's looking around. She's like, yeah, this is cool. I think she was 8 to 10 here. So young. They get to this segment around Egyptology and she becomes enamored. But it's an excitement like, I know this is my home. This is it.
And why is it wrong? That's the part that I found wild.
Yes. When she looked at all the photos in the British Museum, she found the Temple of Sety I. And when they found it, she was so confused when she looked because she's like, where is this? Where is that? Why is this like this? Why is that like that? And at this point, the parents is like, I don't even know what to do. Like, I wouldn't know what to do. So it completely backfired. Their thought process completely backfired. What she noticed was in every depiction that was in the museum, there was no trees and there was no gardens. But again, they were trying to say, hey, this is from this time period. This is what this time period would look like. And she's like, nope, she ain't having it.
Right.
While she's there, and again, I'm imagining it because there's no actual record. I can only assume this kid's walking around kissing the feet of all these different pharaohs and pointing stuff out. And she gets the attention of E.A. Wallis Budge. And he was a renowned Egyptologist. well known.
Okay.
He sees what's going on and he's listening to what's going on. And I can only assume he walked up to the parents and is like, how's your daughter know so much? And they're like, well, I can't really get into it, but there's this and this and this. And then he probably talks to this little girl, because I would, right? If I'm over this section and I see someone excited about it, that's a kid, I'm like, oh, what do you know? And this kid blew the doors off of his house.
I guarantee that no kid has any concept of there being trees and gardens in these temples. I never did until embarrassingly late in life. And any depiction you look up, it's like they draw it from today's standard. Like it's all just yellow and desert and sandy colored. But back then, we know now that there was a lot of places that were very green.
Oh, lush. Very lush. There was a lot of stuff that was going on. And I think it's funny because it's not like both of my kids that have age on them when they were young had something that they knew about where I'm like, yeah, they know like a lot of stuff. And we live in a day and age where technology provides so much information.
Oh, yeah.
But I look at this and I think, regardless of how much my kids knows, I can still stump them occasionally. I've never had them completely stump me on something at 8 to 10 years old. Anything they've been fascinated with and love.
Right. Well, let me tell you a contextual story from my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dating myself here because there was a time where almost no one, at least around here, had internet at all.
Sure.
And I remember right before summer break came out, I read a book from the classroom's library, and it was a Sherlock Holmes book. Okay. Ooh. And I left for summer vacation. The school's closed, no easy access to a library. And I'd say about 3 or 4 days out of school, I'm like, what was the name of Sherlock Holmes' arch enemy? And I did the equivalent of Google back then. I asked my mom and dad, and they didn't know. I asked like my grandparents, they didn't know. So guess what my options were? Wait 2 months until I got back to school to look it up. Like that's how little information was available to children.
Probably even like a library. Like you could have maybe went to the library maybe.
It was not easy to access from where I lived.
Oh, gotcha.
And probably in the 30s, kids probably couldn't even go to the library. Like those were adult places back then.
Really?
I think so.
Wow.
Maybe I'm thinking too far back.
Like when I was a kid, I was similar to you. Like we had a library, and my guess is if it's 30s and 40s, maybe that's the case.
I don't know. Would they just let a kid in there with those books and stuff? I don't like were things mass printed back then as well. I don't know much about the 30s, to be honest with you. I don't think kids were in libraries very much back then.
Probably not. I mean, if we're being a buck, probably not. I don't disagree with that thought process.
I guess my point is that's how hard it was for me to find out something that was written just a few years ago. Like,
oh, for sure.
Under 100 years ago. And I had to wait 2 months to find that information out.
Oh, absolutely.
If I wanted to learn hieroglyphics, even with the resources I had, it just would not have been possible. And I think it would be less possible for her to get all this information.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. To a degree, I think what really makes me sold on that is this E.A. Wallace Budge. He found out what her knowledge level was, and he goes, you need to keep doing this.
Right.
Like he saw potential, and then he became her mentor. She didn't ask him to become the mentor. He saw in her everything she had going on, and he goes, let me be in your life. Let me just watch what happens. And think about it. If we was a kid and there's something that we loved and someone who was over all this was like, "You're special. Let me mentor you." That would have been
Yeah.
huge.
Oh, he wasn't doing that every day.
No.
Or if he was
And
some
this,
kind of weirdo, but I
and he
don't
was
think he was.
renowned. He was renowned Egyptologist. This
Like probably
isn't
the
just,
most educated person in the world on the topic.
at least in my opinion, for at least
Right.
the British Museum anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. I look at that part and I go, something to that. They're like, there's something to that. That's not just like some,
Yeah.
and of course, I don't know at that time frame how old the guy was, how much he knew, but clearly he knew a lot.
Yeah. I just can't imagine any way that the girl would have got access to all this information that she's been putting out. Like
I
even one
don't.
piece of it, where would that come from? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's definitely there's something to it for sure.
Right.
And this is
even
why
the name she
is
chose.
Omm Sety. Yeah, that's like what kid at, that started at like 5 or 6 years old. What kid's like, yeah, call me Omm Sety. That's my name.
Yeah.
It's
impossible.
It's by far the most perplexing. Now, since we've went this deep into the story, Nick, do you know this story? This would be deep enough to where if you knew it, I'm shocked you don't know this story.
Totally mystified by this whole thing. But I'll tell you, you got me hook, line, and sinker. I'm in belief here, but
we haven't even got to the believable stuff yet.
Man, I'm stretching so hard to try and figure out some way I could be like, well, maybe this or maybe that. I can't think of a single thing.
Once we get to one of these segments, you're going to be like, can't answer that. Can't answer.
I'm like, I want so bad to say, oh, it's just this, but I can't.
The best part is when you get done with this podcast and everyone else that's listening, look up Omm Sety, Dorothy Eady, and you're going to learn in this little segment. Don't leave until you're done with the podcast. Even if this is part 1, go to part 2 before you do research, because I'm going to save you a lot of time finding some stuff. But there's something amazing that's going to happen at the end of this. This is why if you're listening to part 1, you're going to want to come back for part 2. We still got more to go in part 1. Trust me. But I'm going to blow y'all's socks off at the end. So if you're listening
like
to part
the very
1,
last segment,
the last 3 segments really kind of, you go,
this is like an M. Night Shyamalan thing here going on.
Kinda. Also, I'm going to provide a little bit of information that's not covered in the narration at the end. Like I say, I've got notes galore over here because there's so much. I'm leaving so much out of the story. This was 40 some minutes when I started the narration. I cut it down. To 19 with the hopes that we're gonna build inside the notes also, because if we're being a buck, there's a lot of words that's super confusing, and I had to dumb them down for myself. So I can only assume it's easier for y'all too. If I put in the narration, y'all gonna be lost. I was lost. I had to look some of these words up because I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And some of the locations.
It's bound to happen. The name of the Egyptologist, I was like, I have no idea what it just said.
Yeah, it's a weird name. Back then they had some really weird name.
Yeah.
So we are officially 8 minutes into a 19-minute narration. So we're about halfway through the narration, but there's still 5 segments left. Are you ready to go to segment 4, Nick?
Yeah, I don't know what's coming up. Bring it on.
This is a dynamic that's going to, again, change the history of Dorothy Eady, a.k.a. Omm Sety. Let's go.
As the mayhem of World War I cast its shadow across London, Dorothy Eady's life veered onto an extraordinary path. The family's escape from a violent bombing raid marked the beginning of a journey that would soon intertwine with the echoes of a distant past. They sought relief in Sussex, where the calm of the countryside starkly contrasted the chaos they had left behind. In this countryside refuge, Dorothy's infatuation with the land of the Nile didn't diminish. It flourished with a mysterious passion. The Eastbourne Public Library transformed into her sanctuary, its books and manuscripts on Egypt serving as conduits to a life she had yet to remember fully. With each page turned, a sense of familiarity coursed through her, and ancient recollections stirred within. Dorothy's 16th year brought with it an event that defied the mundane flow of everyday life. A ghostly visitation in the dead of night by none other than the embalmed figure of Seti I was a manifestation too vivid to dismiss as mere fantasy. This encounter was not isolated. It was part of a series of nighttime visitations that she experienced with increasing clarity. These were not the dreams of an imaginative teenager. They were the returning memories of a past life wanting to be acknowledged. Such supernatural experiences, accompanied by frequent sleepwalking and troubling dreams set in ancient Egypt, were a source of deep concern for her family. Her nights were haunted by a time long gone, her days consumed by a culture to which she could not possibly belong, and yet she did. Several times, Dorothy found herself confined within the sterile walls of mental institutions, her supposed delusions treated with cold clinical detachment. But no treatment could sever the bond that tethered her soul to a previous incarnation. Undeterred by the skepticism of the world, Dorothy's heart remained rooted in the era of pharaohs and pyramids. Upon leaving formal education, she embraced a roaming life fueled by her spiritual and historical quest. Her father's connection to the film industry became the unlikely chariot that carried her across Britain in pursuit of Egypt's whispering relics. Each museum artifact whispered secrets to her, secrets that she, as Bentrichet, a priestess and a gardener from the time of Seti I, had once known intimately.
So her father was in the film business.
So once they went to Sussex, he had a little bit of background in it before, but it really took off in Sussex.
Okay. I'm reaching too far. I was thinking you're gonna say, and this guy started the film of the Mummy. Time frames
Wouldn't that
off.
be crazy?
So, what was? It gave a little more background into what her position was in Egyptian society at the very end of that. What was that? As a gardener, was she or?
So yes, we're gonna. So here's what's happening, folks, because I know y'all are gonna get a little confused here. This is where it gets a little confusing. This is why I broke some of down the notes, because I'm like, you guys are not gonna be able to follow narration.
Right.
I couldn't. I listened to it all in narration. I'm like, I'm more confused now than if I just break it down. So let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
She goes to Sussex.
Mm-hmm.
When she goes to Sussex, her dad's in the film industry. She's provided some opportunities that the average child would not have had. But in addition to that, part of it came from Eastbourne Public Library. Mm. Now, what's fascinating about Eastbourne Public Library, they had a lot of things about Egypt, including they had diagrams of the pyramids and stuff like that that a lot of museums didn't have, which is fascinating. And my understanding, and I can't find a lot on this, so I'm speculating a little bit here. Mm-hmm. You ever know of cases where it's almost like specialists will come with an exhibit to a museum, or like we have a thing called COSI here. Mm-hmm. And with COSI, it's like they'll bring something from, like we just had Egypt stuff from like Tutankhamun and stuff like that. We just had that within a few. Yeah, like it was like exhibits with some of the stuff that's there, and then they had accurate stuff that was created similar to things from that time frame. My guess is this public library had something similar because they had stuff that most libraries did not have, which was manuscripts. They had maps. And they made a point of that when I was looking through some of the research on this. So she starts digging into it because there's going to be a part of this. As she's learning all these new things that she did not have access to, she starts having these extremely vivid dreams nightly. And it's coming from almost like she's looking at something third person, but also first person. And what it is, we're going to have two stories that's going to start blending together. And I'm going to try to simplify this for you guys as much as I can. So Dorothy Eady, Omm Sety, same person, but she's starting to have this dream about which I'm reading through my notes so I don't screw this up. She was a priestess and gardener for Sety the First.
Okay. Which I think would be a common pair of jobs to have at a temple.
Yes and no. And we're going to cover, I think, a little bit more of that next segment, I think. Okay. So in this time frame, there was people that was typically designated for this. You know the story of Moses, biblically, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be very similar to a story of Moses, is how I'll put it. And you'll see what I mean. I think it's in the next segment. Because Moses wasn't supposed to be in this position either, if that makes sense. His position of power, he was not supposed to be a pharaoh.
Right.
Yeah. So this story is about to take an interesting turn.
Before we get further along, so did they moved? Is that the case? They moved to Sussex?
To Sussex. Yep.
All right. Because I was just trying to put together the timeline. She had a mentor at the British Museum who was like a renowned Egyptologist or what have you.
Yep.
Now, she must have moved away from there and lost touch with him, because I wouldn't think that he would allow her to end up in a number of mental institutions.
Well, based on what I see, because you got to remember, this is World War I. World War I came in, there was all these bombings. That's why they moved out. They're like, we can't stay here. This is unsafe. Yeah. So my guess is the last thing they were caring about was a mentorship with this guy that was doing X, Y, and Z. Now, the reason that she went to these institutions was not necessarily based on her the Egyptian thought process she had, but she started sleepwalking and having nightmares.
Right.
Now, a lot of times what would end up happening is people would have whatever, right? It could be as dumb as back then women could have been like, yeah, I think I want to vote. And they'd be like, mental institution, you're crazy.
Did you see that list of all the things that could land women in, like reading a book?
Right.
Mental institution. Kicked by a horse, mental institution.
Correct. Very similar kind of thing. And I think that's what happened here. So obviously the Egyptian stuff, then she starts sleepwalking, then she starts having, these are nightmares to her. These are not pleasant dreams.
Right.
So due to the fact that she started having some of these things, it led her to be confined.
Right.
This wasn't, hey, let's sit and talk. They took her there and they quote unquote basically locked her up.
Did it mention the contents of these nightmares?
Yes, we're getting into that. That'll be very shortly.
Okay.
Yep. In which it kind of started the entire thing, right? So the nightmare that she started having is she was basically taken to the time frame of Sety the First and Bintreshet, which is this girl that she sees, which is the priestess of the garden of Sety the First. She starts seeing this girl's life.
Okay.
So she's seeing some of it in third person, and then there'd be other nights where she's that person.
Well, how does this come into play? Is this something that's going to be covered, or we're just never going to know?
Yes, we're
Oh,
going to cover it.
oh, this is getting spider web like.
That's why I said anyone that's listening to part 1, you're not going to want to miss part 2. I can guarantee part 2 is going to be super duper heavy.
Like, yeah, this is just a build up as far as I can tell. Like we're still not into it.
No.
Oh my goodness.
We're almost halfway through is what I would call it, because the things we've brought up so far, pretty cool stories. We've kind of drifted off. Once we get to the meat and potatoes, I'm guessing I'm going to have to cut some things out, because we're probably just going to stare at the screen for a couple minutes to try to figure out how to piece this together.
We are never going to recover from this. Never.
I'm glad I brought this story to the front line, Nick.
I'm going to go on the record and say this is my favorite one we've talked about so far.
It's a pretty fascinating one. I've always been, because there's really only like 3 really good stories of reincarnation. And I said, if we're going to cover reincarnation the first time, I want it to be the biggest one where I cannot, at the end of this story, I can't go, yeah, this is clearly fake. It's kind of like crop circles. When we did crop circles, I did all the things. But again, crop circles is so wide, I had to kind of bring it in a little bit.
Yeah.
In this case, this one story, it I can't say the word.
Encapsulate.
Yep, can't say that word. I could try it another 12 times. What Nick said, we're going with it. Encapsulate. Boom.
Yeah, you got it. There you go.
So it basically brings it all together. And I think that is what makes this story so much fun. The other ones I can go, yeah, that's kind of weird. Over there, that one's kind of weird. And we'll bring those stories eventually to this podcast also. But I wanted to start with one that I know people can't be like, well, I know what's going on there. But we're going to cover the skeptical side too. Don't think that we're not.
I'm glad you chose this giant one to be the reason you get excommunicated.
Well, the way I look at this, like we've covered other stories. If we would have covered Bob Lazar first, it would have answered so many questions about future podcasts. So this time I'm like, if I'm doing reincarnation, I'm going to start with the biggest one that's the hardest one to poke holes in.
Right.
And this one does. And it's got a really cool storyline. I like the storyline of this one a lot.
Well, I'm total believer so far in this. Like I'm hooked.
This one is good. I think we've covered pretty much everything in this segment. What questions do you have up to this point, Nick?
Well, so she's much older in this. She's a teenager in this segment. She's been in and out of mental hospitals.
Yes.
Is she still living with her family? Has she?
When she's out of the institutions, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's some things I could ask that I don't necessarily think you're going to have answers to. Like what's her family's opinion of all this at this stage? Like, are they believers now? Are they?
I think to a degree they couldn't answer everything that I've seen. And it doesn't obviously break down at what time frames. In the beginning, honestly, her parents just thought she hit her head and it was going to be something that she was completely lost in the sauce on. And it's such a young child at that age that it's kind of like, she'll grow out of it. But as time progressed, they're like, there's something to this.
Yeah. So many years later, it's too long to play a bit. Like this is like the longest practical joke that ever existed.
Correct.
Do you remember that movie Dumb and Dumber?
Oh, yeah.
And then in the sequel, Jim Carrey's character is like in a hospital and Lloyd's been visiting him for 20 years and he's not spoken.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I got you. And he's like, you sat here silently for 20 years just for a joke.
That's Dorothy Eady, folks.
Yeah. I don't think it's that.
It's crazy. It's to be that long.
Yeah.
And
it's intensifying, I'd say.
It is. And it's only going to intensify more.
Well, I need to know who this third party that's entering the arena is. Like,
there's going to be a whole bunch of new parties that enter, but in the next segment,
oh wow,
I think this next segment really starts to dig into kind of what's happening. And if you guys are able to figure out a key moment, which I'm not going to give you, if you can't figure it out, you're going to have to go to the next segment after this. But I think this next segment really kind of broadens the entire story. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's go!
I'm the alien of Omm Sety Pass. Bert wanted to make this one part, but I said no, Earthlings, make it 2 parts.
You don't
Bert's
argue with
mom
aliens.
cannot blame Bert. The aliens did it.
Listen, there was a lot of information. There's a lot of information here. We had to turn it into 2 parts. We didn't really have a choice. There's a lot of information on this. And I can guarantee the best part's going to happen in the second part, because you're getting not just one story, you're technically getting 2 stories.
Right. And you can believe us because we already know. We've already recorded.
Yeah, we already know.
We already know it's good.
Correct. We do these right after the fact, okay?
Yeah.
In fact, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, without lying, because Bert does not lie.
Mm-hmm.
In part 2, we're going to figure out what happens to Omm Sety, a.k.a. Dorothy Eady, and we're going to figure out what happens to Bentrachette.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all that matters. That's all I'm saying.
Be shocked.
You're going to be shocked. Also, don't worry about my time frame. We figured out a few things. Don't worry about it. Listen, we'll talk about it in part 2.
Whenever you hear the word 1930, pretend
just ignore that part.
You heard 1908.
We've already forgotten, Nick. Just don't even worry about the dates. Worry about the story, for God's sakes. What's wrong with you people?
Take it in.
Exactly. And also, Omm Sety may have happened when she's 28. Listen, above and beyond that, this was a banger episode. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this episode. It's the aliens' fault that we did a 2-parter. It apologizes profusely.
Yeah. Sorry.
But until we see you on the next gosh dang podcast, goodbye.
See you later.